Welcome to the podcast for Renaissance Fellowship, where we are creatively and actively revealing Jesus' love to our generation. Here we find the script in Scripture and the text in context. Follow us at reddenfellowship.com or join us live Sunday nights at 6 p.m. in Sunrise, Florida, or online via Periscope. Here's our pastor, Jerrod Cring.
I may be slightly overstating this, but I am prepared to take 100% full responsibility for the housing crisis of 2008. You wondered whose fault it was? You wondered, you're like, who did it? It was me. I may be slightly overstating this again, but you can go ahead and blame me because I had my part to play. And I want to tell you my story. Okay, Angie and I, we were living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time. And I don't know if you remember this, but around 2006, 2000, around there, it was easier to buy a house than it was to buy a Snickers bar at the grocery store. I mean, it didn't matter how much money you had. It didn't matter if you had a job. It didn't matter what your credit score was. There was some mortgage program somewhere. Somebody would find you a way to get you in a house, right? And so around that time, everybody was doing this thing. They were flipping houses. Has anybody heard this term? Flipping houses. And it was people still do it today, but everybody was doing it then, you know? It was the get rich quick scheme of the decade. Basically, what you do is you buy a dilapidated or kind of an ugly house, and then you go in, you buy it cheap, you go in, you kind of fix it up, and then you sell it for a bunch more money than what you bought it for, right? You flip it, okay? Now, I had a friend who was doing this, and he was making a killing doing this. And he told me there was literally no way that I could lose money doing this. Now, not to skip ahead in the story, but let me just say my friend grossly underestimated my ability to find ways to lose money. So we found a house. We got a pretty good deal on it. It needed a lot of work, though. So here was the idea. The idea was that we would go in and do the work ourselves, right? Paint the place, fix some things up that were wrong, make it look beautiful, and turn around, sell it, and retire on a yacht, right? That was the long-term plan. I don't think we were going to get a yacht from the first house, but somewhere down the line, a yacht was involved, or at least a large boat. But the key to this entire process, though, was that we had to rehabilitate the house and do as much of the work ourselves as possible. And one of the ways that you save a lot of money is by doing the work yourself, right? Now, there was just one little problem with that, you know, just small, that we didn't have any idea what we were doing. We were terrible. Actually, we were the worst contractors in history. I don't know how to do plumbing. I'm not a carpenter. I can't lay tile. I can't really even paint. I'm like better at getting paint on my clothes and on the floor than I am getting it on the wall. I'm just terrible at it. So everything that I did ended up having to be undone and redone by a professional. So it cost at least twice as much to do as it should have. And I remember, this is the most embarrassing thing. I brought a friend of mine over to build a wall for a closet, right, that I had already built, but that was not right. And I just remember my friend tearing out the wall that was already there and man, I tell you, buddy, whoever put this wall in, they should never work in this town again. Man, they just let anybody do work around here. If I ever meet that guy, I'm just going to take his tools. And I'll be like, trust me, man, he's not working in this town again. I guarantee you. And it was just mortifying. So the thing was, we ended up getting the house fixed up, and we ended up selling it. And the reality is we sold it to a great, really nice guy, but a guy who had no business on God's green earth having a mortgage and a house. I mean, there was no, he was a great guy, but he couldn't afford a house. He just couldn't afford it. But they found a way to get him in the house. So we lost a bunch of money on this. This was just, Angie always says that we didn't flip a house, we flopped a house. That's actually what we did. But man, I learned so many lessons from that process. I learned so much about myself. I learned about money. I learned about fear. I learned about all of these amazing things. But one of the main things I learned about was the process of restoration. Because there's a big difference between recovering something or resurfacing it and restoring it, right? A big difference between resurfacing and restoring. See, I think when we went into this house, what we anticipated was throwing up a coat of paint, putting some landscaping out front, some plants from Home Depot, and then make it look pretty and sell it for twice as much as we bought it for. That was what we were anticipating. But when we got in there were intrinsic structural problems with this house that could not be ignored, that we could not resell it the way that we had bought it. There were things that needed to be stripped down, restored, and rebuilt. See, that is restoration. When you actually get down to the bare bones of something and you bring it back to a position of being as good or better than it ever was. I mean, does anybody ever watch those shows on TV about restorations? Like, when they restore old cars, or maybe they'll take an old Coke machine and they restore it, And it's funny because they don't just put a coat of paint on it. They take the thing apart completely, every single mechanical piece apart, and they sand it, and they replace the broken parts, and they bring it back to where it's actually as functional or as beautiful or more beautiful than it was when it was brand new. That's restoration. Now, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, we've been in a series, and I've resisted the urge to call it the Pirate Series because it's the 5 R's. Renaissance, Reformation, Revelation, Restoration, and Revolution. See, the 5 R's. Get it? It's the tough crowd tonight. Just a really tough crowd. But that's okay, it's all right. Now, the first week, and basically these 5 R's are like the core values of us as a church. But what we've been learning is that this is the process of both salvation and discipleship for us as human beings. This is the process that God takes us through. And it always begins, we learned in the first week, with Renaissance. We were in John, the 3rd chapter, and we looked at this fireside chat that Jesus had with this guy named Nicodemus, and he told him that you must be born again. We learned that the entire spiritual process for human beings begins with being born again. Because here's the thing, if you're not born again, you can't see the kingdom. It's not that people are terrible people, it's just that until you are born again, it is impossible spiritually for you to see what God has for you. The person that God wants you to be, you just can't see it. And sometimes when you try to explain to people who aren't saved or who aren't Christians, when you try to explain to them spiritual things, and they just look at you with that wolf boy look like, they just don't get it. And it's not because they're bad or they're dumb. It's just because they can't see. When the Renaissance happens, you can suddenly see. And the first thing that God does, once he gives you this Renaissance, this rebirth, is he begins to reform you. He begins to reform you and set you in a new direction. And then once this Reformation starts, last week we talked about Revelation. As we're going on this new path that God has set us on, he begins to reveal things to us. And here's the thing. He doesn't tell us about our neighbors. God doesn't tell us what's wrong with our government. He doesn't tell us what's wrong with our boss, even though that would be awesome, wouldn't it? He doesn't tell us what's wrong with the world at large. When God begins to reveal things to you, it is always about you. It is always about your heart, how you can be better, how you can begin this process of purifying your heart. We talked about this last week. People say, how do I know when God is speaking to me? Here's a good litmus test. If you are hearing things about other people, it probably isn't God. If what you're hearing is about your own heart, about making yourself better, that's probably the voice of God. Because remember, it was Jesus said to cast the log out of your own eye before you look for the mote in others. To judge not, lest ye be judged, for the same measure which you measure out will be measured back to you. He reveals about us. You see, this week we're going to talk now about this idea of restoration. Now, I'm sure many of you will be relieved to know that I will not be giving you any construction tips. I will not be telling you my 5 secret ways to make $1 million in the real estate business. Actually, I will tell you, this is the way I would make $1 million in the real estate business. Start with $2 million. Yeah. There you go. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Now, we're going to talk about how when God begins to reveal to us our hearts, he begins to restore us, and he begins to put the pieces together. And remember, this is not some cosmetic fix. He's not just trying to slap a coat of paint on us and throw some landscaping out front and sell us fast. He's actually going to get inside us. Look at what Jesus says to the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, verse 25. It says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also." I love the way Jesus uses this metaphor. And look at the way that he speaks to the religious system, the religious leaders of his day. He's just hypocrites. He has no tolerance for hypocrisy. And when God begins to restore us, he starts with what's on the inside. He starts with our heart, because we've talked about this whole series that we've been in, that the paradigm shift that happened with Jesus was he came to not focus on what we do, but he came to focus on who we are. He shifted the focus from our actions and our deeds to our heart. Because, see, some religions focus on our spirit, right? There are many religions that focus on your spirit, and what they try to do is they try to make you spiritually superior or spiritually sound by having a series of things that you do on a daily basis. You know, get on your knees and pray in this direction 5 times a day, and that's how you do this. And do these feasts and these fasts, and you do all these things, and that's what's going to make you spiritual, right? Now, other religions focus on the mind. Some religions focus on your spirit. Other religions focus on your mind. Trying to change the way you think, trying to alter the way you think through exercises and meditations. Oh, we're going to get together and we're going to chant, and we're going to change the way you think. Then there's a whole bunch of philosophies and religions that try to change your physicality, your body. And they'll either try to change it through indulgence or austerity. So what we're going to do is we're going to either drown you in pleasure and experience, or we're going to withhold pleasure and experience. One way or another, we're going to try to change you through changing your physicality and your body. But Jesus comes along, and he's the first person in history to come to this amazing conclusion that we are not first spiritual, we are not first mental, we are not first physical, we are first emotional. We are heart. Long before we think, long before we pray, long before we act, we feel. The first reaction you have to anything is a feeling. And that's not bad. That's the way you were made. And Jesus came to show us how to use that to our own benefit. See, if we're going to change our world, we have to change people. And if we're going to change people, we must change their heart. And don't be confused. Changing the world is the goal. I know it's a big, crazy, hairy, lofty goal, but our goal is to change the world. And the way you change the world is by changing people, and the only way to change people is to change their heart. And that's why when Jesus came, he didn't demand position and place. He didn't come and elevate himself and ask for all of mankind to bow before him. He didn't go, kneel before Zod. He didn't do that. He came humbly to have relationship with us. He came to be our friend. He came, as we talked about last week, to sit down and teach us. Not lord over us and point a finger. You are bad, must follow me. He came to have relationship. So here's what I want to do. I want to take these last few minutes, and I want to look at this idea of restoration, okay? And we're going to be in Mark, the 5th chapter. So if you have your Bible or your device, go to Mark, the 5th chapter. And I want to catch us up to where we are up to this point in the story, okay? Remember, we have 2 rules here at Renaissance. Number 1, we look for text in context, and we look for the script in Scripture. Okay, we want to read the Bible like we're reading a story, like our favorite book or watching our favorite movie, so we know what's going on with our favorite characters. So we're in the middle of a chapter, so what's going on? So here's what's happened. Jesus has gotten in a boat, and he's gone across the sea to a place called Decapolis. okay? Decapolis is a place that was like 10 city-states that were in a very condensed period. Like, they were like one big city, but they were individual city-states that had their own identity. So Decapolis, Deca, which is Greek for 10, polis, which is Greek for city, Decapolis, 10 cities. Everybody with me? Okay, so Jesus gets off the boat, boom, boom, and immediately a naked, demon-possessed dude comes running at him, screaming at him. A little weird. Not probably what he was expecting. Not exactly the welcome wagon maybe the Chamber of Commerce for Decapolis had planned for Jesus. Oh, Jesus is coming. Let's get the band, the high school band. No. Here comes the demon-possessed guy. So the demon-possessed guy, he comes running at Jesus. Jesus heals the guy. And in the process of healing him, he takes all of these demons that were in the guy and he puts them in a herd of pigs. The pigs go crazy. Can you imagine the sound of 1,000 demon-possessed pigs? It's the scariest thing you'll ever hear in your life. They run off a cliff and they drown themselves. Now the guy is healed and happy. The townsfolk, not so much. They just lost a herd of pigs. So they politely ask Jesus to turn around, get in a boat, and go back to the other side lest they lose more livestock. So Jesus goes and he gets to the other side of the sea, and he gets off the boat and is immediately met by a huge crowd of people. And one of those people in that crowd is a guy by the name of Jairus. Now, Jairus was a leader of the synagogue, and he had a 12-year-old daughter who was incredibly sick. She was dying. She was on death's door, breathing her last breath. So here comes a desperate father to Jesus. Jesus, please come heal my little girl. Jesus says, let's go. So here we are, this massive crowd of people. Jesus following this desperate father on his way to heal a 12-year-old girl. And this is where our story picks up. Matthew, the 5th chapter, verse number 25. And it says, a woman who had had a hemorrhage for 12 years. Stop right there. Now, this story in the Bible is commonly referred to as the woman with the issue of blood. Okay? Now, it's a very polite way of putting it because basically most scholars agree that what we're talking about here is a prolonged menstrual bleeding for 12 years. Stop right there. Okay, dudes can't even imagine it for 3 days. Okay, ladies, try to wrap your mind around 12 years of a menstrual cycle, okay? Continuous. Now, I did some research, a little bit of research on this, because if we're going to understand what Jesus does here, we need to understand who he's doing it for and what it is, okay? Context, text and context, script and scripture, okay? This type of continual blood loss that she was experiencing would have caused her to be in a weakened and probably anemic state at all times, okay? Constantly battling severe fatigue, illness, probably unable to do even simple tasks without dizziness, lightheadedness, or fainting. Remember, she ain't got no iron pills. She ain't got no blood transfusion. She ain't got no way to replenish herself, right? She doesn't understand what's truly happening in her body. All she understands is what she feels. The physical ramifications, just the logistics of this are mind-numbing, right? I mean, just to think about what she had to go through on a daily basis to just live in that day and age is terrifying. It's horrible. Now, you think that's bad. Now I want you to think about the cultural ramifications. Okay, because a normal woman having a normal menstrual cycle in those times would have to declare herself unclean. And she would have to go to the priest and say, hey, it's that time. And he would say, okay, you got to go lock yourself away for 7 days. Once you're done, you got to come back, bathe yourself, I inspect you, and then I say you're clean, and then you can go back to your normal life. That was normal. Okay, that was a normal situation. But this woman's situation is a whole nother ballgame. Leviticus 15:25. This is what it says. It says, now if a woman has a discharge of blood many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge Beyond that period, all the days of her impure discharge, she shall continue as though in her menstrual impurity. She is unclean. Any bed on which she lies, all the days of her discharge, shall be to her like the bed of her menstruation, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, like her uncleanness at that time. Likewise, whoever touches her shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and also be unclean until the evening. Are you getting a picture of this? This is rough. This woman's life, she had to live in a perpetual state in her culture of being unclean. Do you understand? She couldn't go to church. She couldn't touch people. I mean, the minute that she touched someone, they were unclean. And they had to go to the priest and bathe themselves, and they were unclean until nightfall. She couldn't have physical contact. She couldn't touch her family. She couldn't go anywhere or do anything without informing people of what her disease was. And this was going on for 12 years. I don't think I could have lived this way for 12 hours. I mean, let alone enduring it for 12 years. Now, there's a couple of scenarios that are possible for this. Number one is that this may have occurred to her when she was at puberty, 12 to 13 years old, and she just never knew anything different. That this was just when her puberty hit, this was what happened to her, and this is the way it was. The other possibility is that it happened to her later in life, possibly after the birth of a child, which meant that she would have had to leave her family. She would have had to leave her children. She would have lost everything because she would have been completely unable to care for her family, because the moment that she touched them, they were unclean. Now, do we have a clear picture? Is everybody with me on who this lady is and what she's done? Now, read on. And it says, verse 26, and she had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. Man, I love this lady, don't you? I mean, keep in mind that this is 2,000 years ago. I mean, when we talk about physicians, we're not talking about going to the doctor's office, sterile environment, and having an inspection, right? We're talking about superstitions. We're talking about concoctions. We're talking about experiments, stuff that would make the Middle Ages look advanced. Because they had no idea about the human anatomy. They had no idea, especially about the female anatomy. They had no idea what they were doing. They were just taking shots in the dark. Kind of sounds like our healthcare today, though, doesn't it? Like, we're going to do a bunch of stuff to you. None of it's going to help, but we're going to charge you for all of it. But that's exactly what we're going to do. Thank you to the American healthcare system, just like it was 2,000 years ago. These guys had no idea what they were doing. I can't even imagine the horrific things that this lady had to endure and what she was doing to try to fix what was wrong with her. And it says she spent all she had and none of it worked, and she actually got worse. And when I look at that verse, you know what I see? I see our culture. I see our world today. The programs that people will pay for, the surgeries they'll pay for, the medicines and medications they'll pay for, all to try to fix what's wrong with us, right? Some magic pill or cure that we can take that'll just make us better, that suddenly will just be better, and we'll spend everything that we have, but in the end, none of it works, because we're trying to treat the symptom instead of really healing what's wrong with us at the core. So let's read on. Now, after hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. Stop right there. Now, context here. She ain't supposed to touch anybody. You're right. She's not supposed to touch anybody. According to the law, she touches somebody, what are they? Unclean, right? Okay, so The minute she touches someone, they are ceremonially unclean. So she is absolutely breaking the law of God right now. She is breaking Moses' law. She is ignoring cultural things that are right and that are proper, and she is breaking the law. How dare she, right? How dare this woman break the law of God? The book of Leviticus made it clear. Where does she get off breaking God's law? Read on, verse 28. For she thought, if I touch his garments, I will get well. Okay, this is the first thing. This is a big point, big idea for tonight. If you want restoration, if you're looking for God to restore you, the first thing you got to do is get to Jesus. Okay, restoration is found at the feet of Jesus. Period. There ain't no drug, there ain't no class, there ain't no seminar, there ain't nothing else. Restoration begins. It is found at the feet of Jesus. Whatever it takes, if you have to crawl on your knees, if you have to push through the crowd, it doesn't matter. You have got to get to Jesus. That means many times pushing past religion, pushing past propriety and what society says is okay to get to Jesus. And I love this so much because it says she thought, hey, if I touch the hem of his garment, I'll be made well. You understand, there is zero scriptural basis for this. Nothing. Like there's no scripture in the Bible that says, if thou shalt go forth and touch the hem of thy garment, then thou shalt be made well. Doesn't exist. Okay? There's no precedent for what she's saying. She is making this up off the top of her head. See, we think that there's some formula that we have to do to reach God, that we've got to fast for 40 days and pray 14 times and turn around in 5 circles and jump up and down 10 times, and then God will be pleased and he'll send the rain like he's some sort of Native American rain god, that we have to jump through these hoops to make him happy. God doesn't care about any of that because God doesn't bless ideas. God blesses people. God doesn't honor her idea. She didn't stumble upon some magic formula for getting healed. She just had an idea, and she had faith, and God blessed it. Was it a good idea? Who cares? Because if you got an idea and you got faith, guess what? God will bless it. We want to sit around and wait for the perfect idea. Maybe we shouldn't have a perfect idea. Maybe we should just have an idea, put some faith behind it, and God will bless it. God doesn't bless ideas. He blesses people. He turned to Abraham and he said, anywhere you set your foot, I will bless you. Not if you set your foot in the right place. Anywhere you set your foot, you are blessed. Because it's you that's blessed, not your ideas. God doesn't bless ideas. He blesses people. God was honoring her faith. God was honoring her determination. God was honoring her heart. Now read on verse 29. This gets fun. And immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Can you even imagine that moment? After 12 years, in that moment, to know that everything you ever hoped for, everything you ever dreamed, every prayer you ever prayed had just come to pass. Can you even imagine the joy, the just not even able to fathom what your life had just happened? Can you even imagine? So we're done, right? She's healed. You know, that's it, right? Stick a fork in it. We're done. Read on. Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, he turned around in the crowd and he said, who touched my garments? Now, listen to the disciples. They looked around to see and his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing on you? And you say, who touched me? What are you talking about, you idiot? There's like 1,000 people around you. Who touched you? The disciples are so real, man. I love it. They don't pull any punches at all. They're just like, they're so real. And read on, verse 32. And he looked around, Jesus looked around to see the woman who had done this. Now remember, there's a crowd all around him, all these people. But Jesus found her. There's just something beautiful about that. There's just something beautiful to know that Jesus will find you. You will never be lost in the crowd to Jesus. Your problems, your issues, you may think, oh, they're not important. God doesn't care. You are never lost in the crowd. He feels your touch. And even in a crowd of people pressing on him, he will find you. Jesus, he will recognize and see. You are never lost in the crowd. Never think that your prayers go unheard or even unanswered. You are never lost. He will always see you. Jesus will find you. Read on verse 33. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. If you can underline and highlight, I want you to look at fear and trembling, and then those last three words, the whole truth. Why is she fearing and trembling? Why is she afraid?
She made him unclean.
What was that?
She made him unclean.
Right. She doesn't know Jesus. She'd only heard about Jesus. She didn't know who this guy is. For all she knows, he's about to whirl around and say, "How dare thee touch me in thy unclean state?" She's about to get another lecture from another religious figure. How many of those do you think she's had in her life? Probably more than she needed. For all she knows, she's about to get told how terrible she is, how she's just made all of these people unclean. How dare she? How dare she? She doesn't know. She doesn't know what she's about to get. But she does know this. She does know that after 12 years of spending every dime that she has for a solution, after 12 years of enduring some of the worst torture we could possibly imagine to try to be better, after 12 years, just the touch of a thread of this man changed her life. So she takes a chance. And she tells the whole truth. Very important. The whole truth. Because here's what the second big idea I want you to understand tonight is that restoration requires the whole truth. Now this just makes sense, doesn't it? Right? Like if you want to get your car fixed, you go to the mechanic and you tell him what's wrong with it. Right? If you have 3 things that's wrong with your car, you don't go to the mechanic and tell him 2 things. Right? Because what's going to get fixed? 2 things. And your car's not going to get fixed. If you want restoration, if you want things to get fixed, you have to tell the whole truth. But here's the problem. We don't like to tell the whole truth. We like to tell half-truths, right? I mean, how many moms in here, you know when your kid comes and tells you the truth, you can tell when they're telling you half a truth. Yeah, I did that, Mom, but I didn't do that. Really? Okay, yeah, sure you didn't. Yeah, sure you didn't do it. We like to tell half-truths because somehow we think that half-truths make it better. Like it's less impact, maybe. We're thinking instead of dropping a 10-pound bomb, we're only dropping a 5-pound bomb, and that's way better. You know, we tell these half-truths. And we'll say, yeah, I'll tell you about my experimentation. I'll talk to you about my experimentation, God, but I'm not going to tell you about my addiction. Yeah, God, I'll tell you about my some of my sexual things that have happened to me, but I'm not going to talk about my abortion. I'll talk to you about, my anger issues, but I'm going to kind of keep these violence where I've lashed out. I'm going to keep these to myself. I'm going to tell you half truths. So guess what you get? Half restorations, which is still broke down. So especially in church, we got people walking around that are half restored because they've only given over half of themselves to the process. Now, sometimes I think it is because we're embarrassed. We don't want to share the whole truth. And maybe it's ugly. Maybe there's things that are compromising in the whole truth. But other times we don't share the whole truth because we're not ready to give up those things. Yeah, God, I'll talk to you about my lust, but I don't want to talk about porn. I'm going to keep that. We won't discuss that. Yeah, God, I'm going to talk to you about this, but I don't want to talk to you about that. I'm going to keep that hidden back here. Restoration requires the whole truth. And that is hard to do sometimes. You see, but the beauty is that the longer the journey for someone is, the more beautiful the restoration. Like it's like when you watch those shows and you see one of those antiques that's 150 years old and it's beat down, but you think about all the places that it's been and all the things that it's seen, and when they restore it back to new, it's that much more incredible. I mean, anybody could take a new car and make it look new. There ain't nothing special about that. What's special is when you take something that's broken from years of use, misuse, and abuse, and you fix it up like new. Anybody in here been used, misused, abused? Maybe there's big holes where hurt has come and just worn you thin. And you're just tired. And you're broken. And what you need is a craftsman to come in and strip you down to bare bones and pieces. Clean up those pieces and scrub them clean. And replace the parts in you that are broken. And bring you back to like new again. But you got to tell the whole truth. You got to give yourself over to that process. Because any part of you that you hold back is a part that can't be restored. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, it's just logic. It's just logical. Restoration requires the whole truth. And God is the master craftsman, and he wants to get inside us. And he wants to replace the broken things that don't work anymore. He wants to patch the holes that have been worn down through cynicism and pain, conflict. And then he's going to rebuild us from the ground up. And we're going to be better than we ever were before. Now look at what Jesus tells her. Verse 34, he said to her, daughter. Just immediately, not woman, daughter. It's just like similar to what they were talking about, calling the woman a daughter of Abraham. He calls her a daughter. You are part of this family now. Daughter. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Now, it's interesting here because I see two things there. You've been made well, but you've also been healed of your affliction. And so often there's two things that are wrong with us in life, right? There is what's broken in us, and then there's the life that we've built around that brokenness. It's like when you got a bum leg, right? You the rest of your body compensates for that. And muscles build up, and you build up ways of working around. Someone who loses an arm, they build an entire life around operating with one arm, right? It's just we adapt. That's what human beings do. It's one of our greatest strengths, and it's also one of our greatest weaknesses. We just adapt to whatever our circumstances are. We get used to it, and we adapt. We figure that's normal. This is the way it's going to be. That's what it is. And we can adapt to some really jacked up stuff. You know, we can adapt to some really sick things in our life, to some really broken situations, to some really ugly circumstances, and just figure, well, I guess that's the way it is. Imagine the life that this woman had built to compensate for her sickness. Just the normal day-to-day things that she had to do every single day just to get water, just to get food, just to have clothes to wear, just to have a house. Imagine this life that she had built around her brokenness. That was her affliction. She was healed. She was made well, but she was also healed of her affliction. That affliction that we put on ourselves of the life that we built around our brokenness. That adaptation to things that we should have never adapted to. Can I tell you today that you don't have to build a life around your brokenness? That God can come in and he can restore you and make you like new again. Now that may mean that you have to go out and relearn how to do some things, because you're going to be new. So things are going to be a little weird at first. But I don't know about you, but I'll take some weirdness for a little while over living with brokenness as my normal. I'm ready to have restoration as my new normal. He says her faith made her well, and she was healed from her affliction. She was fully restored inside and out. I thought this was an amazing story for us to tell tonight on Mother's Day. Because just celebrating this woman and her courage, despite everything that she had been through, her willingness to strive one more time. Can you imagine how easy it would have been for her to stay home that day? I mean, how tired she was, how fatigued she was, how just sick of everything she was. But she still got herself up one more time and pushed through that crowd with every bit of energy that she had, reaching just to touch the hem of his garment. Isn't that what moms do? Just when they got nothing left in the tank. When they got no energy left, they still wake up in the morning, they still do what's necessary, they still reach, they still strive, they still do what's necessary. That's the lesson we learn. We get so discouraged so fast, don't we? We hit one wall or one roadblock, and we have one bad relationship, one bad date, one bad job, and we want to shake our fist at the sky and say, God, why have you forsaken me? We're so lazy. What if our moms were that lazy? What if they gave up on us that fast? Man, we'd be in trouble. We'd be dead because we wouldn't have food. They wouldn't have fed us. They wouldn't have changed our diapers. They wouldn't have done anything because we were such a pain in the butt. We were, all of us. But they still pushed through. Just like this woman. She didn't give up because she believed that there was something better for her. Yes, can I ask you tonight, do you believe that there's something better for you? I mean, do you actually believe that there's something better? That you could be better? That the things that are broken in you don't have to be broken anymore? That you can tomorrow begin restoring and begin this process of restoration. But let me tell you two things. It starts with Jesus, and it requires the whole truth. And you don't have to tell me that whole truth. Thank God, right? I ain't telling that guy the whole truth. You don't have to tell me the whole truth. But you do have to tell someone. You do have to share that burden. Find someone. And maybe there's no one in your life right now that can do that. Write it down on a piece of paper as a prayer to God. Get it out of yourself. You need to get the whole truth out. Because restoration begins with the whole truth. Anything you hold back can't be restored. Do it. Find somebody this week. And maybe find someone in your life who you can trust. And tell them the whole truth. Because if you want restoration, and I don't know about you, but I do. Can you raise your hand tonight if you want restoration? If you want to be restored, it starts with the whole truth.